Ladies and gentlemen, the most confusing part of loving an avoidant is not the breakup, not the argument, not even the silence itself. It's the emotional paradox that happens while you're still trying to love them with hope in your hands. Because you can feel the depth. You can sense the tenderness underneath. You can remember the moments where they were soft, present, even devoted. And then, without warning, the love stops looking like love. The warmth turns into distance. The intimacy turns into neutrality. The certainty turns into fog. And the hardest part is that you don't know if you're witnessing a temporary nervous system reaction or a permanent emotional exit. This is where your mind starts to fracture into questions that feel like survival. Are they truly into me? Did I misread everything? Was I just convenient? Why do they pull away right when things feel real? Why do they go quiet right after a beautiful moment? Why does closeness seem to create fear instead of joy? And the most painful question of all, am I too much for simply wanting a relationship that feels steady? What people don't realize is that the avoidant paradox is psychologically addictive. It's not just sad, it's destabilizing in a way that makes your heart chase answers because uncertainty becomes a threat. When an avoidant is present, they can be intensely present. Their attention can feel focused and almost sacred. They can make you feel seen in a way that touches an old, quiet part of you. The emotional chemistry feels rare. Their softness feels like proof that you are not imagining the bond. And in those moments, you don't just feel loved, you feel chosen. But then the withdrawal arrives. And unlike healthy space, avoidant withdrawal often feels like emotional disappearance. It's not "I'm overwhelmed and I'll be back." It's silence with no map. It's distance with no clarity. It's a shutdown that leaves you holding the emotional weight alone. That's why your body reacts so strongly. Because your nervous system isn't only grieving space, it's grieving predictability. It's the uncertainty that feels like danger, not the distance itself. This is where people get trapped in the wrong interpretation. You assume love should look like consistent reassurance, consistent closeness, consistent emotional availability. So when they can't deliver that, you conclude they don't care. But with avoidance, the paradox is that love can exist beside fear at the same time. They may care deeply but struggle to tolerate the emotional pressure they associate with intimacy. Their system can interpret closeness as a loss of autonomy, an expectation they might fail, a role they will be trapped in. So when the bond deepens, the internal alarm can rise, and distance becomes how they regulate. That doesn't mean the behavior isn't painful. It means the meaning is more complex than a simple lack of love story. And that complexity is exactly why the anxious heart gets hooked. Because you are not attached only to who they are in distance. You are attached to who they are in the window of warmth. You bond to the potential. You bond to the version of them that shows up when the wall drops. You start believing that if you can just be safe enough, patient enough, special enough, you can make that version permanent. So you try harder, you soften your needs, you reduce your expectation, you rewrite your standards into something smaller so the relationship doesn't collapse. And this is how the paradox quietly turns into self-abandonment, because the avoidant dynamic can train you to treat crumbs of consistency as proof of progress. Relief becomes your new definition of love. A good day becomes a reason to forget 3 confusing weeks, and your nervous system starts living on contrast: high warmth, low closeness, high love talk, low emotional stability. This keynote matters because your audience needs to hear a grounded truth that resets their self-respect. Feeling the depth does not mean the structure is healthy. Chemistry does not equal capacity, and the most dangerous relationships are often the ones that feel soulmate level in moments and emotionally empty in patterns. You can be deeply connected to someone who is not able to sustain the kind of safety your heart requires. So the paradox is not an invitation to chase harder. It is an invitation to read the situation with emotional maturity. The question isn't only, do they love me? The question becomes, can their love show up consistently enough to protect my peace? Because a love that cannot meet basic standards of reliability will eventually train you to doubt yourself, overfunction for reassurance, and negotiate your worth through anxiety. That is why the first step in breaking the avoidant paradox is not changing them. It's changing your interpretation of what love is supposed to cost you. Love should not require you to abandon your voice. It should not require you to constantly decode silence. It should not require you to shrink your needs so someone else can feel comfortable staying half present. When you understand the paradox, you stop blaming yourself for wanting stability. You stop interpreting their nervous system patterns as your personal failure. You realize that the confusion is a signal, not a life sentence. And that clarity becomes the beginning of a new identity, one where you can love deeply, but you no longer confuse emotional intensity with emotional safety. Ladies and gentlemen, the second keynote is the core truth that rescues you from unnecessary self-blame. Avoidants do not lack feelings, they fear the cost of closeness. An avoidant can genuinely love you and still feel overwhelmed by what love might require because their nervous system often associates intimacy with loss of autonomy, emotional obligation, or the risk of failing someone they care about. So when the bond deepens, their internal alarm may rise not because you are unworthy, but because the relationship begins to feel like a role they don't trust themselves to perform consistently. This is the invisible fear behind the confusing pattern you've lived through. The warmth that feels real, followed by distance that feels brutal. Your heart reads that distance as rejection, but their body may be reading closeness as pressure. That doesn't make the behavior painless, but it makes the meaning more complex than they never cared. The heartbreak is that your nervous system and theirs often run in opposite directions. When you feel disconnection, your instinct is to move closer, to talk, to repair, to reassure, to stabilize the bond right now. But the avoidant instinct is to slow down, to create space, to control intensity, to regain internal calm before they can offer anything emotionally clean. Your pursuit can feel like love to you, but like pressure to them. Their retreat can feel like cruelty to you, but like survival to them. And when neither person understands this underlying fear, the cycle becomes self-fueling. You reach for certainty, they feel crowded, they step back, you feel abandoned, and your nervous system turns the relationship into an emergency you must fix. This keynote matters because it reframes what avoidant love can look like in real life. When an avoidant truly cares, they may not express it through constant emotional reassurance, long conversations, or dramatic romance. Instead, they often show love through practical devotion, quiet loyalty, problem-solving, protection, and selective intimacy. They might remember tiny details about what matters to you. They might show up when you're sick, overwhelmed, or struggling in real life. They might be deeply affectionate in private and oddly restrained in public. They may love in a way that feels like service and stability more than poetry and intensity. And if you only measure love by verbal emotional flooding, you might miss the quieter ways they are trying to stay connected while protecting themselves. But understanding this truth does not mean tolerating harm. The healthiest version of avoidant love is not silence with no map. It is space with communication. It is an honest sentence that says, I'm overwhelmed, I care about you, I need a pause, and I will come back at this time. That single line turns distance into a regulated boundary instead of an abandonment wound. A growth-ready avoidant learns to name their overload rather than disappearing. They learn to create micro-consistency so you don't have to live in guessing. They learn that your need for clarity is not a trap. It is a normal requirement of emotional safety. And this is where your role shifts from anxious rescue to calm leadership of your own standards. You do not need to become cold. You do not need to play games. But you do need to stop treating their withdrawal as a referendum on your worth. When you regulate yourself first, you stop sending urgency that amplifies their fear. When you communicate cleanly and briefly, you reduce the emotional noise that can make closeness feel dangerous to them. When you keep your life full and your identity intact, you send a powerful message their nervous system can actually relax around. I want love, and I am stable without forcing it. This is also where your self-respect becomes the emotional filter that reveals the truth. A growth-ready avoidant will feel challenged, but not threatened by your calm standards. They may not transform instantly, but they will move toward repair, clarity, and safer patterns over time. A non-growth avoidant will use the language of fear to keep you small, call your needs too much so they can preserve ambiguity without accountability. So the truth inside this keynote is both compassionate and empowering. Yes, avoidants can love deeply, and yes, their fear can distort how that love shows up. But your future cannot be built on uncertainty that you keep tolerating just to prove your devotion, because the love that lasts is the love that learns how to feel safe for both hearts at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, the third keynote is where most people finally stop misreading an avoidance love as indifference, because this is the part that reveals the quiet behaviors that often mean far more than the dramatic words you've been waiting for. Avoidants who genuinely love you don't always express it in the loud, romantic, constant reassurance style that anxious hearts instinctively recognize. They often express it in subtler, more practical, more private ways. And if you don't know these signals, you might walk away from real affection thinking you were never truly valued. Or worse, you might stay in confusion because you keep demanding a love language their nervous system isn't yet fluent in. One of the biggest hidden signals is practical devotion. A loving avoidant may not text you paragraphs of emotion every day, but they will show up in ways that protect your life. They might fix your problem without making a show of it. They might take responsibility in a crisis. They may remember the small things you mentioned once and quietly act on them. They make your world easier, safer, more stable. This isn't performative care. It's an avoidance way of loving without feeling emotionally exposed. Their affection often travels through action before it travels through poetry. Another signal is quiet protection of your dignity. A loving avoidant may not be publicly expressive, but they will rarely disrespect you in front of others. They will often defend you subtly. They will avoid humiliating you. They may become protective of your peace without announcing it. And this matters because avoidance is not always emotional coldness. Sometimes it is emotional privacy. They may not want the world to see their softness, but they also won't allow the world to wound you unnecessarily if you truly matter to them. Then there's the slow integration into their real world. This is massive. Avoidant often protect their routines and inner spaces because those spaces are where they feel in control. So when they start inviting you into their everyday reality, something deeper is happening. They're letting you into their normal life, not just their romantic moments. They might share their favorite places, their quiet rituals, their personal time. They may let you see them tired, unpolished, real. That is intimacy for an avoidant. That is bonding beyond surface chemistry. A loving avoidant also becomes emotionally curious in a very specific way. Not loud curiosity, but quiet observation. They start noticing your patterns. They remember what calms you. They store details you didn't even realize you revealed. Sometimes they won't ask a dramatic question, but they will demonstrate understanding later through how they respond. This kind of silent attentiveness is a love signal many people miss because it doesn't look like the classic movie version of romance. But real avoidant affection often shows up as mental and emotional tracking, not verbal flooding. You may also notice the selective softness pattern. Avoidance can be very guarded in public or during high-pressure moments, but deeply warm in private, in small, safe windows. They may show affection at night, or in calm settings, or after a stressful day ends. That doesn't mean you should accept unpredictability forever, but it does mean that their most honest love sometimes appears when their nervous system is least activated. They love best when they feel safe, not when they feel cornered by expectation. Another hidden signal is the way they handle your vulnerability. A loving avoidant might not know how to comfort you with perfect words, but they won't mock your emotions. They won't weaponize your pain. They won't treat your softness like weakness. They may go quiet, yes, but a growth-ready avoidant will try to return with some form of repair. A check-in, a practical support move, a gentle reset. This is important because avoidants who don't care often disappear without repair, while avoidants who love you are more likely to come back trying to restabilize even if their style is awkward. You might also see consistent micro-effort. That's the key phrase. Micro-effort. The small things that prove you're not just an option they visit when convenient. They might not leap into grand commitment language, but they show reliable little patterns. They call when they say they will. They remember important dates. They notice when your energy changes. They try to be present in the ways that feel manageable for them. And these micro-consistencies often matter more than a dramatic I love you speech that isn't backed by real behavior. Now here's the delicate truth of this keynote. Recognizing these hidden love signals is not the same as excusing harmful patterns. The goal is not to romanticize avoidance. The goal is to read accurately so you don't punish real care or chase a fantasy. A loving avoidance, quiet devotion should still move gradually toward clarity and safer connection. You should still require respect, consistency, and repair. But when you understand what avoidant love often looks like at its healthiest early stages, you stop mistaking silence for emptiness. And you start noticing the real signs of attachment forming under the surface. Because sometimes the avoidant who loves you is not giving you a dramatic performance of affection. They're giving you something else that's rarer for their wiring: access, protection, effort, and the slow, meaningful decision to let you matter inside the parts of life they usually keep guarded. Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth keynote is the surprise twist that most people never see until they've already been emotionally exhausted by the push-pull. Avoidance often tests safety, not loyalty. And if you don't understand this, you will keep trying to prove devotion in the wrong language, at the wrong time, in the wrong emotional posture. And you will feel like you're failing a test that was never designed for your heart to pass through chasing. When an avoidant genuinely cares, their nervous system doesn't just ask, will you stay? It asks, will closeness with you stay calm? Because for many avoidants, the deepest fear is not abandonment the way it is for anxious hearts. The deepest fear is engulfment, emotional obligation, and being pulled into a spiral where love becomes a role they must perform perfectly to keep the peace. So when they sense intimacy rising, their body doesn't always say, finally, love. It sometimes says, this might become too much. That is where the safety test begins. And the test isn't always conscious. It's not always cruel. It's often automatic. They may pull back after a beautiful moment, not because the moment meant nothing, but because it meant too much too fast. They may go quiet after vulnerability, not because they didn't enjoy the closeness, but because the closeness activated fear. They may delay defining the relationship, not because they want to keep you small, but because commitment feels like a permanent loss of freedom in their internal wiring. The anxious heart sees these moments and thinks it's being rejected. The avoidance system is often trying to regulate. This is why avoidants sometimes create distance to see what you do with uncertainty. They are testing whether love with you is stable or stormy. They are scanning for emotional volatility, not because your emotions are wrong, but because their system is hypersensitive to the feeling of being trapped inside someone else's emotional weather. So if they pull back and you respond with panic, rapid-fire texts, threats, guilt, or emotional flooding, their nervous system can interpret your love as danger. You might be trying to reconnect. They might be experiencing it as pressure. This is the part that is so unfair if you don't understand it, because you're not chasing to control them. You're chasing to feel safe. But the avoidant test of safety is not about how intensely you love them. It's about how regulated you remain when the relationship hits discomfort. That's why the most powerful thing you can develop in this dynamic is calm clarity. Calm clarity looks like this. You don't disappear to punish. You don't chase to rescue. You don't explode to prove your pain. You anchor. You breathe. You remember your worth is not on trial because someone is overwhelmed. You respond with something short, clean, and emotionally adult. You can say, I care about you. I'm open to talking when you're grounded, or I respect your space, and I need clarity about when we reconnect. That is not coldness. That is emotional leadership, because what the avoidant nervous system is quietly looking for is proof that love with you won't become chaos. Proof that your needs are real but not weaponized. Proof that you can be disappointed without becoming destructive. Proof that you can be close without demanding they sacrifice themselves to keep your nervous system stable. When they see that, a growth-ready avoidant begins to relax. They start believing that intimacy doesn't equal imprisonment. They start experiencing you not as a demand, but as a safe place to land. Now, this keynote has a second layer that protects your dignity. Understanding the safety test doesn't mean you tolerate disappearing acts forever. It doesn't mean you accept chronic ambiguity and call it attachment style sensitivity. It means you stop using your nervous system as a bargaining chip. You stop proving your value by enduring instability. You learn to respond in ways that are steady, but you also learn to require standards that keep you emotionally safe. Because here's the truth that matters. A healthy avoidant who loves you will gradually learn to communicate their need for space. They will build micro-consistency. They will repair after distance. The safety test will evolve into a healthier rhythm of pause and return, not vanish and reset. But an unhealthy avoidant may use the safety test as a cover for control. They might keep pulling away because your anxiety keeps you attached. They might breadcrumb to see if you're still available without offering real structure. And this is where your calm boundaries become the ultimate truth detector. So the real win of this keynote is not just about making them feel safe, it's about keeping you safe too. You're learning a new emotional posture that says, I will not abandon myself to soothe your fear. You're becoming the partner who can hold love without collapsing into pursuit. You're becoming the person who can say, I care about you, while also meaning, I require consistency to keep building. That balance is rare. And it is the exact kind of energy a growth-ready avoidant can bond with deeply. So if you've ever felt confused by the sudden pullback, remember this. Sometimes they are not testing whether you'll love them harder. They are testing whether love with you can stay calm enough to trust. And when you meet that moment with grounded clarity instead of panic, you stop feeding the old push-pull. You start building a safer emotional environment where real intimacy can finally grow. Ladies and gentlemen, the fifth keynote is the most important divide your heart must learn to recognize. If you want to stop confusing pain with potential, because not every avoidant who says they care is capable of the kind of love that protects your nervous system, and the difference is not found in their chemistry with you, it is found in their willingness to build safety with you. Healthy avoidant love includes effort toward stability, clarity, and repair, while unhealthy avoidant patterns choose comfort inside ambiguity. And that single difference determines whether you are building a future or feeding an addiction. A growth-ready avoidant may still struggle with closeness, still need space, still feel overwhelmed sometimes, but they do not use distance as a lifestyle that keeps you guessing. They begin to learn how to pause without vanishing. They may say, in their own imperfect way, "I'm overwhelmed, but I care about you," and more important, they start backing that up with small, consistent behaviors that make you feel less afraid. They don't punish your need for clarity. They don't label your basic emotional standards as pressure. They may feel discomfort, but they do not make you the villain for wanting something that is normal in healthy love. Instead, you start noticing micro signs of maturity. They communicate before disappearing. They return when they say they will. They acknowledge when they hurt you. They try to repair instead of resetting the connection with empty sweetness. That's the key word, repair, because real attachment is not measured by how perfect a relationship feels when everything is easy. It is measured by what someone does when their fear shows up. When an avoidant is capable of healthy love, they don't just come back with a hey or a late night miss you that reopens your hope. They come back with the energy of rebuilding, with accountability, with a willingness to meet you where love is safe for both hearts, not just convenient for theirs. Now compare that to the avoidant, who is not growth ready, and you will feel the chill of the truth immediately. This avoidant may be charming in windows, intense when they sense you pulling away, affectionate when the risk of losing access becomes real, but they resist structure, clarity, and standards because ambiguity is the environment where they can receive your devotion without offering consistent emotional responsibility. They want closeness on their terms, distance when they feel crowded, and access to your loyalty without the cost of mutual stability. This is where the breadcrumb pattern becomes dangerous. Breadcrumbs are not love returning, they are access testing. A short message, a casual check-in, a bare thinking of you, any tiny signal that keeps you emotionally attached without demanding that they actually show up differently. And the reason this pattern is so brutal is because it can feel like progress if you are hungry for reassurance. Your nervous system hears a breadcrumb and thinks it worked. They re-back. But what your future self needs to ask is back to what? Back to clarity and consistency, or back to the same fog in a new moment. Because if you reward breadcrumbs with full emotional access, you teach an avoidant who isn't ready for safe love that they never have to evolve to keep you. They only have to reappear at the right time to reset your hope. And over time, that turns your love into a loyal waiting room rather than a real partnership. This is why the dividing line in this keynote is not about judging avoidant as good or bad people. It's about judging patterns as safe or unsafe. A healthy avoidant pattern bends toward repair. An unhealthy one bends toward comfort. A healthy one respects your standards. An unhealthy one calls your standards too much so they can keep you emotionally flexible. A healthy one makes your nervous system calmer over time. An unhealthy one keeps you in an emotional casino where you win just enough to stay addicted. And the most empowering part of this truth is that you don't need to guess which one you're dealing with if you know what to watch. Watch what happens when you ask for consistency politely. Watch what happens when you say you need clear communication around space. Watch what happens when you stop chasing. A growth-ready avoidant may not become perfect overnight, but they will move closer to clarity because your calm structure makes the relationship feel safer. A non-growth avoidant will resist because your self-respect removes the benefits of ambiguity. So the fifth keynote is ultimately about protecting your heart without hardening it. You can still be warm. You can still be compassionate. But you must stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional capacity. You must stop thinking love is proven by how long you can tolerate uncertainty. The most powerful thing you can do is hold calm standards that say, I care about you, and I'm not available for a connection that keeps me guessing. Because that sentence doesn't destroy real love, it reveals it. It invites healthy attachment forward, and it exposes unhealthy patterns fast. And that is how you stop spending your life trying to decode someone's distance and start building the kind of love that feels safe enough to last. Ladies and gentlemen, the final truth that ties this whole message together is the one that protects your heart the most. The shift is not about playing cold, disappearing to provoke fear, or turning love into a power game. The shift is about calm standards and self-respect so consistent that the relationship can no longer survive on ambiguity. When you love an avoidant, your nervous system can quietly start living on their timing. You feel steady when they're warm, and you feel destabilized when they pull away, and without noticing it, you begin to bargain with yourself. Maybe if I'm softer, quieter, easier, they'll stay. Maybe if I stop needing clarity, they'll stop running. But the forever kind of bond is not built by the person who becomes smaller. It is built by the person who remains warm while refusing to be emotionally negotiable. Calm standards are not threats and not ultimatums. They are the quiet rules you live by that say, I care about you, and I care about what love needs to be safe for me. They sound short and grounded, not dramatic or desperate. They sound like, I enjoy you and I need consistency if we're building. I respect your need for space and I need clear communication around it. I'm not available for a hot and cold dynamic. This kind of clarity is powerful because it doesn't chase the avoidant in closeness, and it doesn't punish them for needing regulation. It simply defines the conditions under which your heart will stay open. That is the difference between love that stabilizes and love that depletes. A growth-ready avoidant can often feel the relief in this. Your self-respect reduces the fear that your happiness depends on their constant reassurance. Your calm tone reduces the fear that honesty will cause chaos. Your full life outside the relationship reduces the fear that intimacy with you will become engulfment. So, when you stop flooding the connection with urgency and start anchoring it with standards, a healthy avoidant may begin to lean in not with instant perfection, but with micro-consistency, clearer pauses instead of disappearance, more reliable returns, more willingness to repair instead of reset. They stop experiencing your love as a demand they must survive and start experiencing it as a structure they can trust. But here is the equally important truth that saves you from years of confusion. This same shift will expose the avoidant who is not ready for healthy love. A control-based avoidant is comfortable when you are endlessly forgiving, emotionally flexible, and willing to accept unclear status. They may reappear with warmth when they sense you slipping away, but resist structure the moment you ask for stability. They may call your standards too much because ambiguity has been the environment where they could receive your devotion without providing consistent emotional responsibility. That is why this keynote is your truth filter. It teaches you to stop confusing contact with commitment. A tender message after silence is not the same as repair. A late-night miss you is not the same as a stable pattern. So you don't have to be harsh, but you do have to pace your heart. You allow words to be sweet while requiring behavior to be steady. You don't reward a single hello with full access to your trust. You watch for accountability, follow-through, respectful communication around space, and the ability to handle closeness without vanishing when intimacy deepens. And the most liberating part is that this shift protects your peace regardless of their response. If they rise, you build something safer. If they resist, you step out of uncertainty with your dignity intact, because you were never meant to earn love by tolerating emotional fog. You were never meant to live in an emotional waiting room where your needs must be silent to keep access. You were meant to be loved in a way that calms your body, not confuses it, and this final key teaches your audience that the real win is not making an avoidant chase. It is becoming the kind of person who can only be loved well